By the third night of the deep frost, Blackwater Fold had disappeared. The northwest wind ran at 38 miles an hour. The cold had fallen to 40 below. Fine snow crossed the lantern light like ground glass and erased the line between roof and sky. On the cellar roof, a brace tore loose and dragged the chimney cap crooked. The draft reversed. Maren tied a rope to her waist and put the other end in Alden Brice's hands. If she failed, the stone would cool and the seed would freeze. Inside, Abel counted the falling temperatures aloud. June coughed behind Esther's curtain. Asa Quill, who had laughed at the wall, worked the inner door with a bandaged hand. 360 bushels sat below, near the freezing line. The needle reached Esther's red mark and did not stop. 48 hours earlier, Maren had come up that wagon cut with 2 children and 1 plumb bob. How had a homeless stove setter become all that stood between a widower's harvest and the coldest night the valley had known? Late on the morning of November 28, 1898, Maren Sayer reached Blackwater Fold with 2 children, 1 handcart, and frost already whitening the hem of her coat. The wagon cut rose steep out of the creek bottom, rutted and frozen hard. Maren leaned into the cart handles. Behind her, Abel put his shoulder to the tailboard and pushed, 10 years old and saying nothing. June rode on top of the bundled bedding. She coughed, stopped, and coughed again. The fever had broken 4 days back on a stranger's porch, but the cold still found her chest. At the top of the rise, a man stood beside an open bin, throwing potatoes into the snow. He worked fast and grim. Maren watched him lift one, turn it in his hand, and pitch it away with the others. He picked up a second and split it with his thumbnail. Even from the yard, she could see the water beating along the cut, gray under the skin. He heard the cart and straightened. "Road's closed to peddlers," Alden Brice said. "I've nothing to buy and nothing to sell." "I'm not selling." Maren set the cart handles down. Her palms had gone white in the creases. Stone dust worked so deep the winters had never washed it out. "You're throwing away more than you're keeping." Alden's jaw set. "That's my business." The top one sweated and froze and thawed. The rot starts at the door wall and works in. She nodded toward the low timber face of the cellar dug into the rise. "Your north bank's gone. Runoff took it in the spring, and you never put it back." That stopped him. He looked at her cart, at the 2 children, at the tools rolled in oilcloth lashed to the side. A short iron bob on a knotted cord had slipped loose of the roll. Alden picked it up. Someone had filed a mark into the brass. 2 crossed lines, a maker's stamp. "Whose is this?" "My husband's. Maren Sayer. He set stoves and flues from here to Brainerd." She did not say pneumonia. She did not say the winter bridge, or the hours he stood soaked to the waist, or the shop that kept his tools and his name when he was gone. "It's mine now." Alden handed it back. "I've no wages and no room." June coughed. Abel's hand went to his coat, pressed flat against his chest where the half biscuit was, wrapped in cloth, saved against a morning that might not come. Maren looked past the man at the warped cellar door, the frost stripe pale on the exposed planks, the smokehouse standing dark and unused with its stone chimney half fallen. She counted what winter would break, the way another woman might count stitches. "Your harvest has 2 days," she said. "Maybe less." Alden did not answer at once. In the lean-to behind him, a hearth was burning. She could smell it. He looked at the sky, low and soft and gray, the kind of sky that lied. "Come out of the wind," he said. "The children first." Inside, Alden poured milk before he asked a single question. He set 2 cups on the table and filled them, and June drank with both hands around the tin, and Abel drank half and no more. Alden did not remark on it. He cut bread and set it down and let them eat while the room warmed them. Only then did he lean against the doorframe and cross his arms. "Say your piece." Maren set the plumb bob on the table between them, the brass mark up. She did not slide it toward him. She only let it lie there, the one thing of worth she still carried. "Let us stay through the deep frost," she said. "Give the children supper and somewhere out. Of the wind for June to sleep. I'll keep your harvest from freezing. I know stone, and I know draft. I set fireboxes with my father before I could read. I ask no wages unless the cellar holds above freezing when it's done. Anyone can promise a warm cellar." "Then don't take my word," she nodded at the door. "I've not been down your steps. Tell me you'll test the claim, and I'll name your 3 worst faults from up here before I ever go in." Alden studied her. "Name them." "The north wall's stripped, and it faces the wind. The door's warped, and there's no room built in front of it, so every time you open it, the cold pours straight down the steps, and your bins sit on the floor. The floor's the coldest thing you own." 3, Alden said. "You're missing one." "Am I?" "Air." He set his cup down. "Potatoes breathe. Seal them warm and dry tight, and you don't freeze them. You rot them. Stone doesn't know which of those bushels has to grow next spring. I do." For the first time since the creek, Maren almost smiled. 4, then. "The children eat first." Alden pushed off the doorframe. "At daylight, you show me what winter is about to break. One night, one day. If your work's there, you're back on the road before the storm." He turned to the shelf for another plate. When his back was to her, he took a second cup down from the pair, filled it, and set it at Maren's place without a word. She looked at it and said nothing either. A knock came hard at the door. Alden opened it on a woman in a mail carrier's coat, her muffler stiff with ice, a card in her mittened hand. "Alden." Therese Van was breathing hard from the climb. "You've not been to town, so I brought it up. Cold wave notice, copied off the wire this morning." She held out the card. 2 days, they think. Maybe sooner. The steep fall's coming." Alden read it once and put it in his shirt. Outside, the soft gray sky had not changed at all, and that was the worst of it. 2 days, Maren said. "I'll need 3 loads of slate, and I hear you've 1 team." They went down into the cellar before the light failed, all 4 of them and Therese behind. Alden went first with a lantern. The cold came up the steps to meet them, a still, heavy cold that pooled at the floor. Maren did not touch anything at first. She walked the 12 by 16 room once, slow, reading it. Then she took a candle from Alden and held it low at the seam of the door. The flame bent flat toward the cellar and would not stand up. "There," she said. "That's your heat leaving, every hour, all winter." She moved to the north wall and laid her bare hand flat against the timber, then against the next plank, then the next. Cold, colder. There. She marked the plank with her thumbnail. "That's where the bank washed off outside. Cut that spot on the far side, and you'll find bare wood facing the wind." Alden crouched at a bin and pulled a potato from the north corner. He cut it lengthwise with his knife and turned the pale face to the lantern. A ring of glassy wet had started under the skin. "That one's a week from gone," he said. "How many bushels down here?" 360, 286 for eating and sale, 74 held back for seed. He said the seed number quietly, the way a man says a thing that matters more than the rest. "There's a note on the farm. $410 due in March. No eating crop, I don't pay it. No seed. There's nothing to plant in the spring to pay the next one. He put the ruined potato in his pocket rather than drop it. The whole place stands on what's in this room. Maren picked up a shovel leaning by the steps, wiped the blade bright on her sleeve, and held it flat above the nearest bin. In a minute, the steel filmed over with damp. "You're right about the air," she said. "It's already sweating in here, so we don't seal it. We slow the cold, and we still let it breathe." She stood. "Here's the order, and the order matters. First, we lift and sort every bushel, seed to the middle where it's safest. Then we bank the north wall back. Then we build a room in front of the door. Then the stone and the fire. Then the vents. And we measure the whole way, so we're never guessing." "Stone and fire." Alden frowned. "You mean to light a fire in a cellar full of food?" "Not in it. Beside it, sealed off, and the smoke carried out through its own chimney. I'll show you it's safe before I ever ask you to trust it." She looked at the walls, the low ceiling, the bare timber face. "The stone holds the warmth the fire makes. When the fire's out, to feed it, to fix it, the stone carries you. That's the whole of it." Abel had crept down the steps. He stood at the bottom with June's small hand in his, listening, and he looked at the shovel and the candle and the marked plank as though they were a language he could almost read. "3 loads of slate," Alden said again. "1 team. And the light's going now." "Then we start with the bins," Maren said, "and we send the first wagon at first light." They lifted potatoes until their arms shook. Alden showed her how, and she let him. He knew this room the way she knew stone. He pulled the seed bushels out from the north bins and set them at the center, where the walls were farthest and the floor warmest, and he cut open the doubtful ones and made 3 piles, sound, bruised, and gone. The bruised went into a crate for eating first. The gone went up the steps and out. "Straw," Maren said once, reaching for a bale. "Pack it against the damp boards while we work. Keep the wind off." "No." Alden took the bale from her hands, not roughly. "Wet timber under packed straw holds the water in and turns it soft by January. Cedar brush first, off the wall, so it can dry behind. Then earth. Straw's the last thing that wall needs." Maren let go of the bale. "Cedar brush, then. And I was wrong." She did not defend it. He noticed that she did not. By dusk, June had fallen asleep against a grain sack in the warm corner, her cough loosening as the cellar heat rose off the working bodies. Abel worked without being told, and Maren gave him the first job that was his own, a stick cut to 2 fingers' width, to measure the slats that would raise the bins off the floor. "Nothing thinner than that goes under the seed," she told him. "You're the judge of it." Alden went up the steps and was gone a while. When he came down, he carried something folded over his arm, heavy wool, dyed a deep green gone soft at the edges. He did not say where it came from. He did not say that Esther had woven it for a window in a room they had made ready for a child who never came, or that he had gone past that room's door for 4 years without opening it. "This heavy enough?" he asked, "to hang across a doorway and hold the warmth?" Maren felt the weight of it. "That's exactly heavy enough." In the corner of the cellar, half in shadow, stood a low child's bench with only one side planed smooth. Abel saw it. He looked at it a long moment and did not touch it, and went back to cutting slats. There was a knock above, and then a neighbor's voice. Nella Coors came down 2 steps, and no farther, a broad-shouldered widow with frost in her eyebrows. "Heard you had trouble with the cold coming, Alden." She looked over the work without surprise. "I've the 1 mare, and she's strong. You can have her for the hauling." She held up a hand before he could speak. Not for nothing. 12 bushels of seed in the spring, if the crop lives. If it doesn't, we're both out and no hard feelings. Done, Alden said. Nella's eyes moved to Maren, to the stone dust in her hands. You're the one going to save it. We are, Maren said, and nodded at Alden, and Nella let that stand. When they climbed out of the cellar for the night, June was too deep asleep to wake. Maren bent for her. Alden was closer, and he had the child up against his shoulder before he seemed to decide to, and June turned her face into his collar and quieted, and her small hand closed on the front of his coat and held. Alden stood very still with her for a moment, the way a man stands who has forgotten how to be leaned on. Then he carried her up the steps and past the shut door of a room he did not open, and he did not say a word about any of it, and Maren did not ask him to. Outside, the first wagon rolled empty down toward the creek in the last of the light. Above the trees, the gray had thickened into something with weight behind it. The slate lay in the creek bank 2 miles up, thin gray sheets of it split flat by 10,000 years of frost, and Maren walked the cut-choosing stone the way she'd been taught. Not that one. She thumbed a wide, handsome slab off the pile Asa Quill had loaded. It rings hollow, cracked through the middle. It'll split the first hard fire. She knocked 2 together and listened. This one, and this, flat and thick. The base has to carry everything above it. Asa Quill was young and quick with the horses and free with his mouth. He loaded another thin, pretty slab, and Maren threw it back off. 5,000 pounds of creek bottom, Asa said, to warm a hole in the ground. Widow, there's stoves for that. Cast iron, been invented. The stove goes cold the minute you stop feeding it, Maren said, and did not look up. Stone doesn't. Abel worked the pile with his 2-finger stick, sorting. He set one slab apart from the rest, squared it against his measure, and spoke, low, the first full sentence he'd said at Blackwater Fold. This one's thick enough. Maren looked at it. It is. Put it on the wagon. The boy carried it to the tailboard with both arms, and a care that had nothing to do with stone. A rider came down the far bank while they loaded, a big man on a good horse, 50 and heavy in the shoulders. Eber Knoll owned the warehouse in town and the largest potato ground in the valley, and 4 years back he had offered to take Blackwater Fold off Alden's hands after Esther died. Alden had said no. Eber had not forgotten the saying of it. He sat his horse and watched the Slate come up out of the creek. A tomb wall, Eber said. Fitting enough, considering what'll be in those bins by Friday. He turned the horse. I promised you my second team for the hauling, Alden. I've changed my mind. I'll be wanting them myself, the way the weather's talking. He looked at Maren without dismounting. Your builder there. Where'd you dig her up? She's my builder, Alden said, until the work proves otherwise. Maren did not thank him for it. She bent and took hold of the next slab. The withdrawn team cost them at once. The first load, heavy and short a horse, nearly stuck climbing the frozen cut, the mare straining and the wheels barking on the ruts. Maren jumped down and unloaded a third of the Slate by hand into the snow to lighten it, then carried it up piece by piece and reloaded at the top, and the light bled out of the sky the whole time she did it. Her hands split at the knuckles. Alden saw it. He worked his own gloves off and held them out. Take them. You'll want them. Take them. He was already turning to the horse. He drove the team the rest of the way barehanded and said nothing more about it. They laid the first courses that night by lantern, and the cellar floor came up colder against Maren's palm than she had reckoned on. The work took shape over the next day the way stone does. one true course at a time. They banked the north wall first, cedar brush against the timber for a dry gap, then earth packed 20 inches deep at the base, then sod cap sloped to shed the meltwater away from the wood. Maren pressed her knuckles to 4 spots on the inside, while Alden marked the coldest plank from within, and outside they found the bare place opposite exactly where she'd said. They framed the room in front of the door next, 3 feet of reclaimed plank, an outer door swinging outward. Esther's green wool hung inside it on a smooth iron rod for weight. A gasket of moss and clay ran round the outer frame. Alden set Abel at the bottom of the steps with a candle at ankle height and swung the old outer door shut. The flame lay down flat toward the cellar and would not rise. "It leaks," Abel said. It did. The reclaimed door had warped, and a gap wider than Maren's thumb stood open at the lower hinge. Her first fitting of it had failed. She did not talk her way around it. "The door's no good square. I'll plane it." "Bevel the closing edge," Alden said, already reaching for the plane, "and move the latch down so it pulls hard against the gasket at the bottom where the cold sits." He set to it. She held the door. Between them, the flame at Abel's candle slowly stood up straight. When it did, Alden hung the wool curtain behind the door and stepped back to look at it, and for a moment he did not look like a man thinking about potatoes. That morning at breakfast, he had set an extra oatcake beside Abel's bowl, as though the count had come out wrong, and had turned to the fire before the boy could refuse it. Asa Quill came with the 3rd load and stood in the cellar mouth, grinning at the wall going up. "He's hired himself a widow to brick up his own supper," Asa told the room. "There's a story for town." Maren put a slab in his arms. "Carry that to the base, then." The 3rd load was not enough. With Aber's team gone, they had hauled less than Maren had counted on, and when she laid out what remained against what the upper courses needed, she came up short by a good 2 feet of wall, and the light was already failing. She said the number plainly. There was no 4th trip to the creek before dark, and after dark the frozen cut was no place for a loaded wagon and 1 tired mare. Alden went out without answering. Maren heard the smokehouse door drag open across the yard. When she came round the corner, he was inside it, prying loose the flat field stones of an old interior partition, a low wall that had once divided the curing room. He worked it apart stone by stone in the last light, and carried the pieces to the cellar himself, and would not let her take the first armload from him. The smokehouse had been Esther's. Maren understood that without being told. A man does not tear a wall out of his own dead wife's building with that particular care unless it costs him. She did not say so. She took the second armload when he let her, and they set Esther's stone into the courses beside the creek slate, and the wall closed the last 2 feet before midnight. The firebox went in at the last, a small iron box out in the vestibule, well clear of the food, a short brick throat carrying into the base of the slate, a sealed low channel of brick and clay running behind the stone, a clean out door at the near end, and a chimney rising at the far. No wood touched the hot passage anywhere. Maren checked that twice. "Ready to test the draw," she said, and reached for a twist of paper. Maren lit the paper twist at the firebox mouth, and the smoke rolled straight back into her face. It did not climb the chimney. It pressed backward out of the cold flue and hung along the vestibule ceiling, gray and sour, and up in the house June began to cough through the floorboards. Alden had the outer door open in a heartbeat, both doors, driving the smoke out with a board. "Put it out," said a voice from the top of the steps. Lucius Head came down slow, 62 and exact, a retired stove setter and the township's fire warden, and he did not raise his voice because he never needed to. He looked at the smoke, at the firebox, at the long dark run of the channel, and his mouth thinned. Out. Now. A cold chimney won't take a long flue, and while it argues that bad air's got nowhere to go but the room a child sleeps over. He waited until the fire was drowned before he said another word. He was not a man who enjoyed being right at another's cost. He asked his questions the way a doctor asks them, because the answers mattered more than the asking. "Where's your clean-out?" he said. "A long run collects soot, and soot in a hidden channel catches fire against nobody's knowledge. Where's your bypass to warm the stack before you ask the smoke to travel? How tall's the chimney above the ridge, because that wind will come down over the roof and stuff the draft back down the pipe if it's short? Show me the gap to inspect the joints once it's all closed up. One seam leaks, and every soul who goes down those steps breathes it." He crouched at the throat and laid his palm near the brick. "And what's your timber clearance here at the hot part? Because I see a joist a hand's width off, and a hand's width isn't clearance. It's kindling waiting on a schedule." Every question changed the wall. None of them was asked to shame her. Maren stood with the fire tongs in her hand and could not for a moment make her fingers open and set them down. The smoke smell was in her hair. Abel watched her from the corner. Alden did not tell her it was all right. He picked up the top length of chimney pipe and carried it up the steps and out into the yard. "Then we make it taller," he said from the top of the steps, "and we do it again." They did it again. They ran the chimney 5 feet higher, past the ridge, into clean wind. They cut in a startup bypass so the fire could warm the tall stack before the smoke was asked to travel the long way round. They opened 2 joints Lucius pointed at and rebuilt them, and Maren wiped each finished seam with a white cloth the way Orrin always had. Soot on the cloth meant the work was not done, and she did not say his name, only turned the cloth to the light and read it. The second test she lit at the throat. The paper twist flared, bent, and the flame leaned into the flue, and the smoke went up and away and did not come back. Lucius watched it climb. He was not a man to be moved by one clean draw. "It draws," he said. "Get me numbers before you call it more than that." The first true firing began after dark, and by the middle of the night the cold outside had fallen to 9 below zero, and the cellar told them what they had built. Alden read the thermometers by lantern, and Abel wrote the figures in a column under headings copied out in Esther's old hand from the ledger box. Central bin, 37. North floor, 34, warmer than the door had been by 5 degrees. Then Alden held the light to the upper bin near the top of the slate, and his face changed. 48. Too warm. Maren was already crouching at the firebox. "That'll sprout the seed or start it sweating. I drove it too hard." She sat back on her heels. "I built the fire like the wall was a stove that wanted feeding. It isn't. It's a bank. You put warmth in slow and let it settle down through the stone. I ran it hot and fast and cooked the top." "Cut it back, then," Alden said. "Short fires. Long soaks between, so the stone levels itself out top to bottom before the next one. The cold outside's still dropping. The reading says the top's too warm. Not the cold. The reading." He looked at her steady. "You promised to fix it. You never promised to guess right the first time." Maren looked at him a moment. Then she banked the fire down small and wrote the new schedule in the margin of Abel's page. Short burn, long soak, brief airing at the warmest of the cycle. Abel had done a thing that night that no one saw until morning. The half biscuit he had carried since the road, wrapped, hoarded, saved against the day breakfast failed to come, he had taken out of his coat and left on the windowsill. In the morning, he ate the fresh breakfast at the table like the others, and the old biscuit sat on the sill untouched, and Maren, finding it there, left it where it was. Beside the stove that dawned stood 2 cups already set, filled, waiting. Alden was out at the barn. Maren looked at the pair of them a while, then she drank hers, and left the other where his hand would find it. Lucius came at first light and read the whole column without a word until the end. "It held 6 hours," he said. "It held against 9 below." He closed the ledger. "That is not the same as holding against what's coming. 6 hours isn't 3 nights, and the coldest air always comes at the worst hour." He set the book down. "You'll want more wood than you think, and someone awake at that fire every hour it burns." Then he tried the high vent's pull cord, and it did not move. The frost had stiffened it in the night. Maren went up top to see. She had cut 2 vents into the cellar, a low intake on the sheltered southeast side, a high exhaust in the far ceiling corner, so the room could breathe a little without losing the fire's heat all at once. The high one had glazed shut with wind-driven frost, and a cellar that could not exhale would sweat, and sweat would rot the crop as surely as freezing. "Show me it isn't sealing," Lucius said, not unkind. Alden brought a shovel down and wiped the blade bright and held it flat over the seed bins. In a slow minute, the steel filmed gray with damp. "There's your answer." "Then it airs at the warmest of every cycle," Maren said. "Not when it likes." She built the high vent a steeper wooden hood to shed the blowing snow, and she ran a length of stiff wire down its throat, hooked to the inside pull cord, so a hand could break the frost loose from below without ever opening the main door. She worked the cord. Ice cracked off the wire and fell, and the draft breathed again. Abel watched her do it. "So a body can clear it from inside, in the dark." "In the dark," Maren said, "which is when it'll want clearing." The ledger was 2 days full and proved everything except the one thing that mattered, and Ebernol came up the cut to make sure they knew it. He did not dismount the first minute. He looked at the smoke rising clean off the new chimney, and something crossed his face, and then it was gone. "I'll make it simple, Alden." He held a folded paper. "I'll buy the whole crop where it lies tonight at winter loss price, and I'll take the March note off your back with it. You walk into spring owing no man." He nodded at the sky. "Or you sit here and let the weather make the choice for you. Either way, the crop's decided by Friday. Only one way you keep the farm." "No," Alden said. "No's a word for men with a warm cellar." Eber turned his horse. "You've got a stone wall and a widow and a boy with a pencil." Therese Van came in behind him on foot, out of breath, her card gone soft in her mitten. "It's moved up, Alden. Wire says the steep fall's coming faster than they read it this morning, and colder." "Lucius?" She turned. "They want the fire warden to know. 40 below's not off the table now." Lucius nodded slowly and began at once to name the last things. Every joint tested cold before the front, the clean-out kept reachable through the storm, sand buckets at the firebox. The water barrel moved off the door before it froze fast against it, and someone at that fire the whole night. Maren counted the wood into measured bundles by the vestibule. She counted twice. "How long can we go with no fire?" Alden asked. "If a joint opens or the wind takes the cap?" Maren looked at the slate wall, at the 5,000 pounds of stone standing quiet against the north side, warm now clear through for the first time. "Long enough to fix one," she said. "Not long enough to lose one." They tied the lantern above the vestibule and strung the guide cord from the house. They drew Esther's curtain around June's pallet. Abel set the ledger and the pencil where he could reach them in the dark. The wind, which had blown steady out of the west all afternoon, paused. For a full minute the valley went dead still, the way it does before it turns. Then it came round hard out of the northwest. The first gust struck the new cellar door hard enough to shake clay from the frame. Maren looked at the outside thermometer. The cold had arrived 6 hours early. They worked against the 6 hours the storm had stolen from them. Alden drove a marker stake at the cellar mouth and tied the lantern above the vestibule where the wind could not reach the flame. He strung the guide cord from the house corner to the cellar door and back, knotted at arm's length intervals so a hand could count its way home in the dark. Maren checked the chimney braces one more time and did not like the highest one, but there was no time to pull it and reset it, and she said so to Lucius and to no one else. Inside, they laid out the storm in things a body could touch. Sand buckets by the firebox to drown a fire fast. The water barrel dragged well clear of the door before it could freeze against the frame. The firewood split into measured bundles, each one a firing so no one would guess in the dark how much was left. Esther's thermometer hung at the central seed bin, checked against the one Lucius had brought until the two needles agreed. Abel was given the ledger and the pencil and told the readings were his. Everyone, whatever else happened. Maren closed the repair satchel with the tools for the clean-out inside it, and she cinched it shut not with its old cord, but with a wide leather strap, cracked and double-stitched, a brass buckle worn smooth at the tongue. It had been Oren's. He had used it to lash his tools under a wagon seat so they could not shake loose on a rough road. She buckled it and set the satchel by the steps and said nothing about whose it was. Abel watched Alden knot the guide cord. "Why both?" he said. "The lantern and the rope." "A light tells you where home is," Alden said. "A rope tells you whether you're still going toward it." Lucius came down for the last time before the front, tried the draw with a paper twist, watched it climb, and gave his one warning. At the first sour smoke, drown it. Don't argue with it. Don't nurse it. The stone will carry you a while with the fire cold. It will not carry you if the bad air gets down here with the children. Maren drew Esther's green wool curtain around June's pallet on the safe side of the airlock. The child slept and coughed and slept. Between one look at the outside thermometer and the next, the reading had fallen 12 degrees, and the light was still in the sky. The temperature broke like a dropped plate. It fell from 12 above to 16 below inside a few hours, and the wind came round the roof line and howled in the chimney, and the first true wave of the deep frost was on them. Outside, the world went to pieces. The barn was a gray smear, and then it was nothing. Snow moved sideways in long ropes across the yard, and the cold came through wool as though the wool were not there, and a man who wandered 10 steps off the guide cord would not have found the house again. Inside the cellar, the lantern threw a small, steady circle, and June slept behind Esther's green curtain, and Abel sat by the thermometer with the pencil, and the storm was a sound in the roof and not yet a thing in the room. Alden went down first with the lantern and stopped on the steps. Frost had bloomed white across the old door frame, up the reclaimed planks, along the seam where the warped door had once leaked. It stopped where the rebanked wall began. The banked north face stood dark and dry, and the frost had climbed it and found no purchase and quit. "It holds," he said, and Maren heard in his voice that he had not been sure it would. She lit the first measured firing. The flue ticked and settled as it warmed, iron and clay learning the heat, and the slate took the warmth in slow, dark, and patient, the way she had promised it would. The central thermometer held at 38. When the outside reading passed 20 below, Alden set his hand on the woodpile. "Build it up. It's getting worse out there, not better. Look at the top bin." "The top bin's fine. The top bin's 42 and climbing, and 42 sprouts your seed." Maren did not move to the wood. The cold outside doesn't set the fire. The reading sets the fire. Short burn, long soak. The stone carries the gap. Alden looked at the top thermometer a long moment. Then he took his hand off the wood pile and let the fire stay small, and he did not ask her to prove it first. It was the first time he had followed her without wanting to see it work before he believed it, and neither of them remarked on that either. The wind found a corner of the vestibule that had not been sealed hard enough and drove a thin white fan of snow through it. Alden went out into it to pack the gap from the weather side, and Maren went with him and held the lantern low against the wind so its light fell where his hands worked, and when the corner was tight, they came back down together, and no one had been saved by anyone. The central bin still read 38. Then the high vent's pull cord stopped moving, and above the seed bins the first faint shine of water began to gather on the underside of the slats. Abel saw the water before either of the adults did. He had Maren's bright shovel blade in his hands, holding it flat over the seed the way he'd been shown, and the steel had filmed gray and then wet. "It's sweating," he said. "Up top. The vent's stuck." The high vent had glazed shut with frost, the way it had once before. A cellar that could not breathe would sweat, and sweat would rot the seed as surely as any freeze. Maren could not open the main door long enough to clear the air without pouring out the heat she'd banked. She took hold of the inside pull cord and the wire she'd hooked to it and worked it hard. Ice cracked somewhere above and fell rattling down the vent throat, and a narrow draft resumed, cold and thin and enough. The central reading dropped 1 degree, 38 to 37, and she let it because a degree lost to the air was a degree, and rot lost the whole room. The shine on the slats began to pull back. A sound came through the wind then, from beyond the guide cord, out toward the road. A thud, and then nothing. Alden took the cord in his fist and went out along it, knot to knot, into a dark so full of blowing snow the lantern was a smear behind him. The wind tried to turn him at every step, and the knots under his mitten were the only thing in the world that told him he was still moving toward the road and not out into the open where the drifts had no bottom. At the far stake the cord went slack in his hand where a body had fallen against it, and he found Asa Quill on his knees in the drift, crawling the wrong way, away from the light, one glove gone and that hand gone white to the wrist, his coat packed solid with snow. His sleigh lay on its side up on the road above the fold. He had been bringing Teresa's last message down when it went over. Alden got a fist in Asa's collar and hauled him around toward the lantern, and the two of them came back down the cord hand over hand, Alden counting the knots aloud so the wind could not steal the count. "I saw the light," Asa said, when they were down out of the worst of it. "Over the cellar. I said no light was needed there." He shook so hard he could barely shape the words. "I steered for it." They got him down out of the wind. Maren did not put his hand near the fire, though every part of him wanted it there. She opened her coat and put his frozen hand flat against her own ribs, against the warmth of her own body, slow, the way you thaw a thing that will crack if you rush it, and she held it there while he shook and swore and went quiet. No one said a word about the tomb wall, or the story for town, or the widow who had smoked a man out of his own cellar. Aber's cellar, Asa got out when he could talk. Door shifted on its hinge, froze open at the top. He's carrying potatoes into his kitchen by the armload. Half the valley's moving what they can into the house. June woke behind the curtain at the sound of a stranger's voice. She looked at Asa shaking under the blanket, and she pushed her own small blanket out through the gap in the curtain toward him and would not take it back. Asa took the fire watch after that, feeding the measured bundles one at a time with his good hand, his bad one wrapped and useless in his lap. Lucius came down the steps, stopped, and lifted his head, and his nose worked once. "There's soot in the air," he said quietly, "near the clean-out. Somewhere a joint's talking." The cold outside reached 32 below, and the wind leaned its whole weight on the chimney, and somewhere behind the slate a clay joint that had been heated and cooled too many times let go a thread of smoke. Abel smelled it first, bitter and sour near the bottom of the curtain, and he said so and did not leave the ledger to say it. Maren found the soot thread at the clean-out seam, a fine dark feather of it lifting on the draft. She did what Lucius had told her and did not argue with it. Firebox damper shut. The burning wood raked out into the sand bucket and drowned. Everyone up and out of the cellar but herself and Lucius. The outer door swung wide for a slow count to let the bad air climb out into the storm, and then shut, and the cold poured in behind it, and the potatoes were left to the stone. Maren wiped the clean-out seam with a white cloth, the way Orrin had taught her hands to do it before she was tall enough to reach a mantle. The cloth came back black along one edge. She mixed a clay to reset the joint. Alden looked in the bucket and shook his head. "That's cellar clay, too much sand in it. It'll crack out again in a night." He went up into the storm and came back from the barn with a crock of Esther's old chinking mixture, the recipe she'd kept for the barn walls, and he cut it with wood ash from the firebox until it was right, and he handed it to Maren without a word about where it had come from. Maren knew flues. Alden knew the farm's own clay. The joint took both of them. They reset it and could light no fire while it stiffened. For nearly 2 hours the cellar had no fire, and the stone carried it alone. Those were the longest 2 hours. There was nothing to do but watch a needle and feed a child water and keep the door shut, and the wind read off the seconds against the roof. Asa tended the drowned firebox that could not be lit, laying the next bundle ready so that when the clay was hard, there would be no fumbling in the dark. Abel wrote a reading every quarter hour, and his numbers were the only thing in the room that moved. The central reading slid from 37 to 35 and held there, and the wall gave up its warmth slow and even, exactly as she'd built it to, and Maren watched the needle and made herself believe the thing she had made. She reached for the fire once, too soon. Alden put his hand flat over the firebox door. "It's still soft. Light it now and you'll blow the joint and we lose the draw for good." He was right, and it was her trade, and she took her hand back. She knew stone. He knew clay. She let him hold the door shut until the clay said it was ready, and not before. Up on the roof, in the dark, the chimney began to knock against its highest brace, once with every gust, harder each time. By the third night, the deep frost came to its worst hour, and everything they had built stood or fell on the next. Blackwater Fold had gone out of the world. The northwest wind ran at 38 miles an hour. The cold had fallen to 40 below zero. Fine snow crossed the lantern light like ground glass, and there was no line any more between the roof and the sky. The central thermometer was falling through 34. The knocking on the roof stopped, which was worse than the knocking. The highest brace had torn loose. The chimney cap had twisted half across the outlet, and when Maren lit a paper twist at the firebox, the smoke bent, hung, and rolled back into the room. No fire could burn until the cap was cleared, and every minute the fire stayed cold, the slate gave up a little more of what it had left, and 33 sat waiting under 34. They took their places without being told. Abel stayed at the thermometer and the ledger. June coughed behind Esther's curtain on the safe side of the air. Asa worked the inner door with his one good hand, and his bandaged one held against his chest. The seed bins sat closest to the freezing line, in the coldest reach of the room, and the whole spring stood in them. Maren went up for the roof. The cord on the repair satchel snapped in her hands the moment the wind took it, and she did not stop to mourn it. She buckled Oren's leather strap around the satchel instead, brass tongue biting home, and slung it across her body where it held tight against her side. She tied the guide rope around her own waist and put the free end in Alden's hands. "If I go, you pull," she said. "Not before." She climbed the lee side of the roof where the wind was least, and the wind was still enough to lay her flat against the shingles and hold her there. She crawled to the chimney. The cold up there was a different animal than the cold below. It went for the wet of her eyes, and the breath in her chest and the edges of her ears. And it took the feeling out of her fingers a knuckle at a time. The snow came at her sideways and found every gap in her wool. She kept her weight low and her belly to the roof and moved by inches, because a body up here that stood up straight was a body the wind would take, and there was no one who could climb up after her to fetch it back. Below, in the small lit square of the cellar, the others held their own places against the dark. Asa braced the inner door against the wind's pull with his one whole hand and his shoulder, so that each time the outer door had to open, the warmth would not all be dragged out at once. June coughed behind Esther's green curtain and did not cry, and Abel stood between the two thermometers with the pencil, and the seed bins waited in the coldest corner with the whole of the coming spring shut up inside them. The cap was frozen crooked, iced into its twist. Her first swing of the hammer glanced off and did nothing. A gust came round the ridge and kicked the ladder out from the eave, and below her Alden threw his shoulder into it and pinned it to the wall and kept both hands on the rope, holding the ladder with his body and Maren with his fists, and he could do only the two things and did them. Through the cellar doorway, Abel's voice came up, thin and steady, calling the ledger. 34. Maren freed the cap. The twist came loose in a shower of ice. But the torn brace would not go back to its old hole. The wood split out around it, and she would have to anchor it lower to fresh timber by feel, with fingers that had begun to stop closing when she told them to. 33 3/4. Alden shouted up through the wind that they could give the chimney up, drag the seed bins into the house, save what they could carry. Maren looked down into the black square of the cellar mouth and did the sum in her head. 360 bushels, 21,000 pounds and more. Up an iced ladder through a whiteout before the cold in that room reached the seed. It could not be done, and she knew it could not, and she knew something else besides. "The wall is given us until morning," she called down. Alden took a fresh grip on the rope. "Morning is enough." 33 1/2. Below in the cellar, the needle on Esther's thermometer came down to the red line Esther had scratched just above freezing, 4 winters gone, and touched it. For 3 long breaths it seemed to go on past, downward, the way a thing does when it has decided. Then it stopped. Maren set the brace to fresh wood, lower than it had been. She reached for the satchel, and it was there against her side where Oren's strap held it, the tools inside it dry and in order, not scattered halfway down the roof where the old cord would have let them go. She took out the anchor and the driver, and she drove the anchor home with a hand she could no longer feel and did not need to feel because she had set 1,000 of these, and her arm knew the swing without her. The cap sat square. The wind went over it instead of down it. She came down the shifted ladder, rung by rung, with Alden's shoulder still pinning it to the wall and Alden's fist still on the rope, and when her boots found the ground he did not let go of either until she was standing on her own. Lucius put a paper twist to the firebox. The flame bent, leaned, and climbed. The draw had come back. They lit the fire small and slow, and the warm gas went up into the channel and along behind the slate, and the wall began to take heat again from the base, and the lowest the room ever fell that night was 33 1/2 degrees, and it did not freeze. No one said they had won. Maren would not have it. Alden cut one potato from the nearest test crate and turned it to the lantern, and it was firm and sound clear through, and that told them about exactly one potato and nothing about the rest, and so they waited for the light. On the fourth morning, the wind died, and the cold loosened its hand, and Alden did not count what he had saved. He counted what had failed. He set them off flat, one at a time, and Maren wrote each one down. The airlock door that had warped and leaked and had to be planned, the first draft that ran backward, the upper bin that had cooked too warm the first night, the high vent that froze shut, the clay joint that opened in the worst of it, the chimney brace that tore loose at the peak. A weakness shouldn't be let to hide behind a thing that lived, Alden said. Write them where we'll see them. Abel wrote them. He had kept the ledger through the whole of the storm and would not give it up now, and he entered each failure in his careful hand under Esther's old headings, the backward draft, and the warped door, and the cooked bin, and the frozen vent, and the open joint, and the torn brace, all of it, the record of every place the cold had tried them. A season past he had wrapped a half biscuit in cloth and hidden it in his coat against a morning he did not trust to come. Now he guarded a book of numbers that only mattered if there were going to be more mornings and springs and harvests to measure against it, and he guarded it as though there would be. Then they opened the bins, and only then. Alden cut potatoes lengthwise from 4 places, the north eating bin by the old door, the central seed bin, the upper bin along the wall, a test crate off the floor, and held each pale face to the window light. A small number near the original door had taken a surface chill, a shallow band of glass under the skin, ruined for keeping but not for the table. No bin had frozen through, no wet rot had started anywhere. The seed was firm to the center, every cut one clean, sound face. The crop had lived. It had not lived untouched. Maren wrote that down too. Alden set the chilled potatoes aside for the table and the hogs and counted what was left for keeping and sale. It came near enough to what he had carried in the fall, enough for the eating stock to meet the $410 note in March, with a little over. Enough seed, firm to the center, to put a crop in the ground when the frost went out. The farm would stand. He did not say it that way. He only wrote the eating count and the seed count in 2 columns and looked at them a while, and then he closed the book. Lucius came and read the whole ledger from the first backward draft to the last reading of the night, every firing, every vent, every degree, and he read the failures Alden had entered that morning, and he examined the reset joint and the new anchored brace with his own hands. The wall didn't make heat, he said at last, and closed the book. It kept you from wasting the heat you made. That's the whole of it, and it's enough. Nella brought 2 crates of her own down into the cellar to store, while her cold room was mended, and left them among Alden's bins, and came back a day later and found them sound. Asa Quill came up the thawing cut with a load of fitted chimney brick in his sleigh and set it beside the smokehouse and did not make a speech about it, only touched the brim of his hat toward the wall and left. Eber Knoll came last, the way a man comes when he has heard a thing he does not want to believe. His own cold room had failed him in the storm. The door had frozen open at the top hinge, and he had lost the better part of his eating stock to the kitchen floor and the hogs. He expected softened potatoes here, too. Alden handed him a knife without a word, and Eber cut one from the lowest test crate, the coldest corner of the room, and turned the firm white face of it over in his big hand for a while. He walked the wall. He crouched at the clean-out and looked down the sealed channel at the slate. "Show me where the smoke runs," Eber said. Maren showed him. She showed him the firebox, and the throat, and the low channel, and the tall stack, and the bypass. And when he asked whether she'd build the same for his own cold room, she named a price for the design, and Alden stood by and did not talk her down out of it, and Eber paid what she asked. Respect had come where the mockery had been. Nothing more than that came, and nothing more was needed. A week on, when the ground was still hard but the worst was plainly over, Alden looked out and saw the handcart pulled into the yard and Maren loading her tools into it. The bargain had been to stay through the freeze. The freeze was through. He did not go out and ask her to stay. He did not make a speech of it. He went to the table and drew up a paper instead, in his own slow hand, and brought it out to her in the cold, and gave it to her to read before he said anything at all. It gave Abel and June the right to live at Blackwater Fold for a full year, and their shelter through the winter after that, no matter what passed between the two grown people who signed it. It gave Maren a legal share of the spring crop for the cellar and the structures she would keep in repair. It said her tools were her own. It said Alden could not sell her wall or her design to any man without her name on the work. "The children first," Alden said. "Whatever else. That part doesn't turn on me and you." Maren read it twice. "You're giving me a share of your own ground." "I'm not giving you what was mine." Alden looked at the wall, the chimney, the boy standing in the door with the ledger still under his arm. "I'm naming what you already carried." Maren signed it. Therese Van and Lucius Head put their names under hers as witnesses, and the handcart stayed where it was, and the tools came back inside. That evening, beside the stove, Maren said, "We can stay until the ground opens." Alden took a second cup down from the pair and set it beside hers and filled them both. "Stay through planning," he said. Maren looked toward the room where the children slept, the door of it standing open now, a lamp burning in it for the first time in 4 years. "Longer than that," she said. He did not answer that with words, and she did not want him to, and it was said. The spring came up green over the fold. The four of them rebuilt the north cellar face for good, stone and earth and sod, made to last past all of them. The slate left over from the wall they laid down as a path from the house to the cellar, and it stayed dry underfoot when the thaw turned everything else to mud. Abel took Esther's low bench, the one planed smooth on a single side, and finished the other 3 sides himself under Alden's eye. June carried kindling to the stove, 1 stick at a time, proud as a queen with each one. When the ground had opened, Maren went and built the cold room Aber had paid her for, a smaller, safer version of the same idea, with the clean out where a man could reach it and the timber a full hand clear of the throat. Lucius came and looked at that one too, and found nothing in it to condemn. And the ledger stayed on its nail by the cellar door, and the readings went on being taken, hour by hour through the next hard nights, and week by week through the easy ones, because a thing that had been proven once was still a thing, a body checked. Eber sent a load of good chimney brick and did not come to the wedding. Asa brought a new cap with 3 strong braces where the old had had one and set it himself and stayed for the cake. Lucius climbed up and looked the whole installation over and could find nothing in it to condemn, which from Lucius was a blessing spoken aloud. Therese and Nella stood as witnesses, and Nella carried 2 stoneware cups to the table and set them out, the way Esther used to set them, and beside them she set 2 smaller ones. Abel came to Alden with the bench and a question. "Pa Alden," he said, "should this edge be rounded?" "Enough," Alden said, "that June can't catch her hand on it." And June crossed the room on her own 2 feet and took a fistful of Alden's trouser leg and looked up the whole height of him and said, "Pa, Blackwater Fold did not live because the deep frost showed it any mercy. The deep frost showed none. It came for the door and the vent and the chimney and the seed, and it found every one because the cold finds everything. It found the weak places. It only failed to find them alone. The door had been planed, and the vent had been cleared, and the joint had been reset, and the brace had been driven low into fresh wood, and the slate had held what the fire made until the fire could be made again, and none of it had been carried by one pair of hands. Maren and Alden never pulled each other out of anything. They only stopped believing that a thing carried alone was proof of a person's strength. Esther's thermometer still hangs on the cellar wall, the red line just above freezing. Oren's strap still holds the repair satchel by the steps. And on the board beside the stove, 2 large cups and 2 small ones dry every morning side by side. By spring, the creek ran again, and its water crossed the black slate path without moving a single stone, and June walked over it between Maren and Alden, one hand in each of theirs.